Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Valerie and today we continue working on our coat. In the first part, I was talking about what materials to choose for the coat and demonstrated how to interface all the pieces of the coat. If you haven't seen it, I'll leave a link in the description. You can check it out and then come back here. In this episode, we'll focus on the lining. We will attach insulation to the lining and finish the vent. And we'll also work on darts and pockets. So let's get into the tutorial. I cut out all the lining pieces. There wasn't anything challenging, just place the pattern and cut. Now we need to cut out the pieces of our insulation. But before that, just like the main fabric, we need to pre-shrink it. So I'm going to lightly pass over it with a steam iron. Then I'm going to take the front and sleeve lining pieces, pin them to the insulation and cut them out. I'm not touching the back pieces yet, there's still work to be done with them. So I cut out the front and sleeve pieces, now as for the back pieces. On the center back seam, there is a pleat. This pleat allows your body to move inside the coat without tearing the lining. If I simply sew the insulation to the lining now and then make a pleat, I'll end up with a bump on the back. To avoid this, we will first stitch the lining back pieces together, create the pleat, and only then cut out the insulation piece. So for the lining back, we have two pieces, while the insulation will be one piece. Stitch the lining up to the slit. Then stop. By the way, I want to draw your attention that the back lining pieces are cut differently, so that when we connect them, we get a flat piece. Sew up to the very edge of the vent and then carefully pivot. Here we don't go all the way to the edge, about 1 centimeter. We'll leave the centimeter for the seam allowance. After that, press the seam allowance with an iron. Here's how it should look on the wrong side. I cut the seam allowances and press them in different directions. I also press the seam allowances of the slit by 1 centimeter. And here's how it looks on the right side. All clean and neat. By the way, don't forget that the lining vent should align with the vent on the main fabric. Also, I made a back pleat. I simply folded it and made a little stitch. Now I can proceed to cut the insulation. So I laid my back lining on the insulation and now I'm going to pin it, but only from one side. We'll make our first stitch along the center, so for now we are pinning only one side. It's much easier to work with the lining when it's dense enough. Firstly, of course, it's good for outerwear, and secondly, a thin lining would wriggle, making it inconvenient to work. Now, fold back the lining and also pin the center seam allowance in place. Then make a stitch about 1 mm to the right from our main stitching line. Here pivot and stitch along the vent angle. So we've connected our lining with the insulation in the center. I pinned the lining around the perimeter. Our piece is very large and various shifts are possible, so make sure you pin it well. In some places I even basted for greater security. And I marked the stitching lines. I don't want to quilt with any rhombuses or squares or create intricate voluminous quilting. I'm just going to stitch the perimeter along the side seams, shoulders, and neckline. I won't touch the bottom line. Then, as you can see, I divided each back piece in half, and from the very bottom, I drew such curved lines that goes up into the armholes, along which I will also make stitches. They will hold my installation in place. And I'm also going to make a stitch along the vent slit. From the vent slit, I move 2 cm on each side, and at the top I'll create a little house shape. Purely decorative, just to secure my installation well in this area. From the very bottom of the garment, I marked 5 cm and basted my insulation to the lining. Then I flipped it over and simply cut the excess insulation. So here, 5 cm from the bottom, the insulation doesn't reach the bottom of the lining. Now let's go on a sewing machine and stitch everything in place. I'm going to start my stitch from the very bottom at a distance of 7 mm from the edge. There is a 1 cm seam allowance, and to ensure the stitch goes into the seam allowance while being in a sufficient distance to cut the insulation well, we make a 7 mm stitch. I have fully assembled my lining and stitched it to the insulation. Now I'm going to show you everything in detail. So I made stitches around the entire perimeter of the pieces. On the front pieces, just like on the back, I made curved stitches to secure the insulation. Then I connected the back pieces with the front pieces along the side and shoulder seams. Nothing complicated, just pin together and stitch. And I cut out the insulation from all the seam allowances to avoid unnecessary thickness, and press them. I also left a fairly large opening on the left side for turning the coat inside out. It will be there until the end, to make it more convenient to work with the coat. At the bottom, I didn't stitch down the insulation. It's only secured with longitudinal stitches. And here, along the vent, I also made a stitch and cut out the excess insulation. Now as for the sleeves, it's quite simple. First, sew the insulation onto the larger piece, then onto the smaller one, and then connect them both along the center seam. At the bottom of the sleeves, I cut the insulation 3 cm from the edge. Here you also need to make a stitch 3 cm from the bottom edge to secure the insulation. I forgot to show that. I also cut out all the excess insulation from the seam allowances. On the left sleeve, I left an opening for turning as well. Through it, I will stitch the side opening we made on the coat, so there won't be visible hand stitches on the main piece. So if you make an opening on the left side, make a small opening on the left sleeve as well. And that's all for the lining. Now let's work on the darts. I've outlined the contour of my dart once again, and now I'm going to mark its center. After that, I'm going to cut it along this line. Generally, this dart is more decorative, and if you want, you can skip it altogether. Then I'm going to fold my front piece, pin the dart, and stitch it on the sewing machine. I don't make any big stitches at the beginning and end. Instead, I tie knots. Since the fabric is quite dense, there's no need to complicate things with darts to avoid pointy tips. Then I'm also going to cut out all the excess interfacing from the dart to avoid extra thickness. After that, give the dart a good press with an iron and weight it down with something heavy, like a book. And this is how the dart looks from the right side. We do the same on the other side and move on to the pockets. There are two ways to attach the pocket welt. The edges of the welt can either be hidden inside, stitched on the triangles of fabric, or welt can be stitched on top with hand stitches. I will be going with the second option, because my fabric is quite thick and it won't be very convenient to tuck the welt inside. So first, I'm going to extend the lines of my pocket marking. Now take the pocket welt, fold it right sides together and pin it on both sides. Then make stitches with a 1 cm seam allowance. Then I'm going to trim the seam allowances in a way that one seam allowance is longer than the other by 2 to 3 mm. This prevents the seam allowances from pressing through the fabric. And I'm going to trim the corners as well. After that, turn the welt right side out and press it well with an iron, making it as flat as possible. Now, I'm going to measure 1 cm from the edge of the welt and draw a line along which I will make a stitch. And now, I'm going to attach the welt to the front piece. So I'm going to place the welt on the area where my pocket will be, align all the lines, and pin it in place. You can even secure it with basting stitches. Now stitch from the beginning to the end of the welt, making sure to align all the lines for a clean and parallel finish. Now take the lining piece. I attached the pocket facing to the lining with a 1 cm seam allowance and pressed it like this. Now I'm going to align the facing with the top line of our future pocket and make a stitch. Check to ensure everything is precise and all lines are aligned. Now let's cut our pocket. So here's how we'll cut it. Divide the distance between the stitches in half and leave such triangles. After that, cut it like this. Cut carefully, because the fabric is very thick and one awkward movement can trim off more than necessary. Now pull everything through this opening. So I put everything in place, pasted the welt with cross stitches to prevent it from pulling, and pressed it well with an iron. This is how it looks on the front side. Now we need to sew the other end of the line into the bottom seam allowance. So just fold it like this and make a stitch. And we also need to close the side seams. Just make stitches with a 1 cm seam allowance, making sure you catch all the layers. So this is what it should look like in the end. Now all that's left is to sew on the welt with hand stitches. I'm going to take a needle with thread, tie a knot, and insert the needle into the very corner of the welt. I'm going to catch a bit of the welt and go back. Then I'm going to move a bit forward, catch a bit of the welt again, and go back. This stitch is called a blind stitch, because if done correctly, it's almost invisible. I've sewn the edges of the welt on both sides. As you can see, the welt seems to be slightly pressed into the coat. You can give it a good press with an iron once again, and that's it. The other pockets are made in the exact same way, so I won't show them again. They are even easier, because they go straight, not diagonally. This is how they look from the wrong side. And now we can assemble our coat. So I stitched the back pieces together along the center seam, then connected them to the front pieces along the side and shoulder seams. I pressed all the seams and cut out the interfacing from the seam allowances. I also marked the lapel fold and notched for a collar attachment with basting stitches. That's it for now. In the next episode, we'll finish the coat. We'll work on the lapels, attach the collar and sleeves, and insert the lining. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can like this video and subscribe to my channel. See you in the next episode. Bye!